Hello, family. Let's get that audio check done before I introduce my guest. We do have a special guest today. Been all over his YouTube this morning. It's 32 data-packed videos. The erudition is very impressive, and you guys know that I'm a bibliophile, so when I'm hearing people's information, I pretty much automatically go to the title and the author and the time period. It's very easy for me to do, and I'm very impressed with our guest today. As a matter of fact, I will be pulling 1, 2, or 3 of his books off the shelves. I have them in here, although he's written, I believe, over a dozen. So December 8th, excuse me, December 8th, we have the Houston meetup, full-on opus presentation. Other than that, I don't really have any announcements. Nothing that really bears mentioning right now. I just finished my research on the Vedic, Brahmin, the old Indian calendars. You're going to be very surprised what the findings are. I know we like to take great pride in the high antiquity, or at least the claims of high antiquity of many civilizations, but when you break things down to their base denominators, you find out that many of these claims, they're not very old at all, and the source materials are even less so. So you're going to be very surprised about what you find out about the high antiquity of Vedic, Brahmin, and even the Sanskrit. Everything is post-cataclysm, guys. Everything. All writing post-cataclysm. So look, no announcements really. My moderators are taking care of that. The audio is very good. I better get prepared really quick. I know. Here's one. I have another book, King of Edessa, and one called The Last Pharaoh, about Jesus. But my favorite book by far of today's guest is Tempest and Exodus. Listen, I know many of you have read Lost Scriptures of Giza that was published in 2006. You're going to be so surprised about the crossover, especially with the research on the Great Pyramid. I've never met this man. I've never come across his information until recently when I received 3 of his books. But to read my own book, Lost Scriptures of Giza, and my massive bibliography in the back of that book, and to read his, you would think that he and I were studying in the same room. It's so unusual. It was so many aha moments when I was going through this text. So, without further ado, Mr. Ralph Ellis is in the studio with us today, and we'd like to give him a proper Archaix welcome. Moderators, keep the chat clean. Thank you for your service. And Mr. Ellis, how are you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me on, Jason. Good to see so many people in the chat room there. I see it's quite busy today.
Oh, you're going to draw some attention. There will be probably close to 12 to 1,500 in the chat before we really get going.
Excellent.
Yeah. By the end of the day, I'm pretty sure by the end of today, this video here will have 10,000, close to 12,000 views. It's a lot of my podcasts. I mean, I do a lot of uploads that are data. They're just data dumps, my historical research, and like the intro that you just watched, those are books that are in my actual library. I have 2 studios. I have a very extensive library from the 16, 17, and 1800s. And all those books you just saw are in my possession now. And I share the contents with my community on a regular basis. And we just try to do what you do. We just try to separate fact from fiction. That's all we're trying to do, is figure out what was historically verifiable and what is basically political science today. What can we avoid and what can we absorb?
Yep, that's been my life's work. And I've enjoyed it too. It's been good fun. But just looking through the ancient texts and finding out what more can be found in those texts. And I was very surprised, actually. I've been at this for 40 years. And I found a lot of new data that I don't think has ever been exposed before. So anyone who does read my books, you'll find that all the information is original. So you won't find it in any other books. And I wouldn't say I'm going out on a limb either. I'm keeping this within the boundaries of science and history. So, that's what I do. But nevertheless,
I can agree with you. I went through your channel this morning, and I was so surprised to see the citations of so many texts that we have entirely different interpretations from people like Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock will read the same text you do and get some wild extrapolating. He'll extrapolate something out of there that is so unusual and fantastic and really doesn't fit with the historical facts. And I was very impressed with your intro video. Your introduction video on your YouTube channel was short to the point, powerful, and you basically laid out what you're going to execute in the release of all these videos. And you did it. 31 videos. You released 31 history-packed videos. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, it's all been good fun, and 14 books as well. So we'll have a look at some of those. So where shall we be heading to? Are we Old Testament or New Testament? Which will go down the best, do you think?
Well, it doesn't really matter, because the Old Testament and the New Testament, by the Archaix analysis and the research that's very interactive with my community, they share with me, I share with them. We've pretty much ascertained that the Old Testament isn't much older than the New Testament, and that both of them were written around pretty close to the same period of time.
Okay, yeah.
So the Old Testament is based off older texts and sources, but it seems to contain a lot of manipulation. And then the New Testament was written around those manipulations. This is what we have found, and we don't have all the data, but like I said, this is a journey, and we're all in on it. You can start wherever you want to start.
I was going to have a look at the New Testament first, if that's all right.
Excellent.
So yes, my research on the New Testament, I mean, people will probably think that they know everything about the New Testament because this has been done so many times before, but I found a lot of new information, which I don't think anybody has ever discovered since the times of the Knights Templar. So since 1307, basically, when I think a lot of this information was lost. And I've linked the New Testament back to Edessa. And just in case people don't know where Edessa is, perhaps I ought to give you a little map. So if I do a presentation and go to a share screen.
Yes.
And if I share that now, we should come up with a map.
There it is right there.
And that shows us where, let me zoom in a little bit on that. Yeah. So
yeah, I can see Edessa is it's right in the smack dab middle of the ancient Amorite Empire, where the Amorites used to be.
It's on the borders of Parthia and Rome, basically. So we've got the Mediterranean on the left. Judea is down the bottom here. You can see my cursor.
Right.
Syria is here with Damascus. And then we head up towards the northeast. And this is Edessa up the top here, just across the Euphrates River. And that's important because it's always mentioning these people that come from beyond the Euphrates. And of course, Edessa was beyond the Euphrates. And I think a lot of these people, these biblical characters, came from Edessa. And this is the main book that has that information, Jesus, King of Edessa.
Yes.
And it does go on to my Arthurian Grail legend. But most of this information is contained in this book. And let's go back to the map a little bit, because I was just going to read out a little bit about John the Baptist, because this highlights what I'm talking about and the style of my research. I don't know if listeners know, but John the Baptist was a real historical character. He wasn't just, a guy from the Gospels. And so we have mention of him by Josephus and Moses of Corine. These are all historians.
Yes,
Josephus
we're familiar with Moses of Corine.
Good, excellent. So they actually mentioned John the Baptist as a historical person, but it's interesting what they say, and I don't think anyone has ever highlighted this before, because when Josephus mentions him, so everyone knows the story that John the Baptist got his head cut off because he was complaining about the marriage between
I remember the apocryphal story that has the daughter of Herod demanding the head of John the Baptist, and then
yes.
in the apocryphal story, she slips on the ice and has her own head chopped off while her body flows under the ice, and her head's just sitting on top of the ice. You familiar with
Yes.
that story in the apocrypha?
Yeah, there's lots of these strange apocryphal stories. So this was Herod Antipas. He was a son of Herod the Great. Now, he was married to the daughter of Aretas, King Aretas of Petra, the rose-red city. But he divorced her and sent her back home again because he wanted to marry Herodias. And John the Baptist said that that marriage was illegal for many reasons. And because of that, he got his head chopped off. Now, because of this, King Aretas of Petra sent his army up to Judea to punish Herod Antipas. And so Josephus says of this battle, he says, Aretas made war between him and Herod Antipas and raised armies on both sides and prepared for war. And when they joined battle, all of Herod's army was destroyed by the treachery of some fugitives from Syria. And you've got to wonder why the lacuna here? Why is information missing? Because Josephus knows everything that is going on.
That's a fantastic word, and I have educated my community as well that
Good.
many ancient texts have lacunas, and
Yes, a nice big gap.
a nice big gap, and our modern day scholars like to fill it with political rhetoric. A lot of times those lacunas are filled with some BS. But
well,
lacuna just means missing material.
Josephus fills it with padding, you might say. So he obviously knows who these people are, but he just calls them fugitives from Syria that helped King Aretas. And you've got to wonder, why is he missing their name out? Because he must know who they are. And of course, we don't find out this information. This is why it's so important to get two versions of the same story. And we get the second version when we go up to the character you mentioned before, Moses of Chorene, who was a Syriac. Now, being a Syriac, he was separate from Rome, so he wasn't influenced by Roman censorship because he was concealed behind the borders of the Council of Chorene and behind Islam and the Iron Curtain of Islam. So they had different texts over there and different histories. And Moses of Chorene says of this very same battle, he says that King Abgarus, well, there's a new name for you. We'll go into this. He was the king of Edessa. King Abgarus allied himself with King Aretas of Petra and gave him some auxiliary troops to make war upon Herod Antipas. Being sharply attacked, Herod's troops were defeated thanks to the help of the brave Edessans. As if by divine providence, vengeance was taken for the death of John the Baptist. Now that's
so there was a whole battle in retribution for killing John the Baptist.
Yeah, it's not really mentioned in the biblical text, is it? There was an a regional battle between three nations because John the Baptist got his head cut off. Now, this tells us some very interesting things. For a start, it tells us that Josephus is being economical with the truth. He obviously knew who these other people were, but he doesn't tell you. Then we go to Moses of Chorene and we find out that this was the Edessan royal army. So what we know from this is Josephus has deleted Edessa from his texts. You can go through every text that Josephus ever wrote, and you'll find Edessa and all of the kings of Edessa have been deleted from his books.
So let me ask you, Ralph. I'm very familiar with Wars of the Jews and Appian Way, but Are we against Appian? Yes, we are. These are both huge works.
Yes.
So, and I've cited Josephus many times. Flavius
Yes.
Josephus of the House of Flavian. There's a lot of controversy about his true identity, and that maybe he wasn't Josephus from the beginning. I don't care. It's the text
Oh,
that matters to me, and the body of the text and what it contains.
I
But
have some ideas on that.
yes, you could think it's possible that the copies of Josephus that we have today are just that, copies, and that the original one is he may have mentioned Edessa, he may have mentioned all of this, and it's the copies that don't mention it anymore, because we have other
Yes.
instances where interpolations have been found by scholarship that have been put in Josephus that they know for a fact could not have been in Josephus
Oh,
originally,
yes, yes.
because they're anachronisms. So
Yes, yeah, that happened quite a lot. Now, he might have mentioned Edessa initially because the initial texts of Wars of the Jews were written in Aramaic, and they were sent to Edessa. Now, we know that because Josephus tells us so. Now, they were the first texts, and then later on, they were translated into Greek because he wanted to give them to the Romans as well, because the Romans were involved in the Jewish revolt. It was all about this war. So yes, the initial copies might have mentioned Edessa, but the reason he deleted Edessa is because Rome didn't want you to know anything about Edessa, because it was Edessa that started the Jewish revolt. And we'll go into this in a minute.
I got you.
And Rome obviously didn't want people revolting against Rome. So when he wrote this story, obviously Rome, Emperor Vespasian, and remember Josephus was working for Emperor Vespasian. He was a lackey of
Right.
Emperor Vespasian. Vespasian obviously said to him, delete these people from history because they were the enemy. They were the people who started the Jewish revolt. And that's exactly what Josephus did. He deleted them from history. And that's important because you have
So
to ask
would
yourself,
this be
why?
would this be you're not talking about the second destruction, you're talking about the first destruction of Jerusalem, AD 70 to 73.
66 to 70, yeah.
Yes,
Well,
and
73 if you include Masada, yeah.
Masada was the last
Was the
holdout. So
last, yeah.
because this is when Josephus was writing, and I know that Vespasian sent his son with the German 10th Legion to level Jerusalem.
Yes.
So it's the first destruction that you're talking about here.
Well, the 66 to 73 Jewish revolt. That's
because
what
the Bar Kokhba was 65 years later. They went back and destroyed Jerusalem again.
Yes, they did. Well, they had another uprising. Yes.
So Edessa was the one that wired up the first Jewish revolt against Rome.
Yes,
Okay.
they did indeed, and that's why they got deleted. But so that's one point we can get from these two quotes. The second important point is that we know why Aretas was there. King Aretas was there because his daughter had been divorced and sent back home again. So this was a matter of family honor. So that's why Aretas was in this battle. But why were the Edessans in this battle? Because remember, Edessa is miles away. It's up in northern Syria. It's a long way. It's 26 days march from Edessa down to Judea. So why were they down there? Well, Moses of Turin tells us, he says, as if by divine providence, vengeance was taken for the death of John the Baptist. So the only other thing that happened at this time was that John the Baptist got his head cut off. Now, this tells us, by all means, John the Baptist must have been a prince or a priest of Edessa.
Yeah, he must have been important to the Edessans in some way for a whole war to be waged.
So he must have been a prince of Edessa. Now that changes the story immediately from the very, very start. It means that the whole of the gospel narrative is linked to Edessa somehow. And yet nobody has mentioned that for 700 years.
You're right. That is new information. And it also changes the baptism story to something else.
It changes everything. Yeah. Because we can do this again. It's amazing how this is being covered up and nobody's realized that this is going on, but I think they have realized, but they don't dare mention it because it changes the story.
Okay,
And
well, in northern Edessa, Antioch, this is Palmyra, Damascus, the Jerusalem itself, Tarsus. These were the capital cities during the Crusades. These were when the Norman Knights and the Templars and the Knights Hospitallers were coming down to set up garrisons in all these cities. And
well,
Edessa is that's in the ancient maps. Edessa would be on the border of northern Israel and the ancient empire of Mitanni, which was Amorite. But
yeah, well, since you've mentioned it, what was the first city that was liberated by the first crusade in 1098?
would
Well,
it
there's
have
a
been
question.
the first crusade? It wouldn't be Jerusalem.
No, it was Edessa.
It was Edessa. Yeah, I remember. I remember. Wasn't Edessa massacred because the Crusaders were so upset and so they had?
No, that wasn't. No, that wasn't Edessa. That was another of the cities. Yeah, the first crusade in set off in 1096, and instead of going down to Jerusalem, it went straight ahead due east. It went across the Euphrates, and it went to Edessa. So the first city that was liberated by the Crusaders in the first crusade was Edessa. And you've got to ask yourself, why? What was so important in Edessa that they wanted to go to Edessa? Well, I think it's because they knew that Jesus came from Edessa. And that's why they went there, because this was well known. I don't know if you know, but the first church, Christian church, well, it wasn't Christian, the first church of Jesus and James that was set up wasn't in Europe. It wasn't in the Near East. The first church of Jesus and James was this one. There we go. Obviously, this is a modern rendition of the church,
right?
But this is
right.
The Christian church. Is in
India?
India. Yeah, this is the Malabar Church.
Wow.
And this was set up in AD 52.
Are you saying that the Nestorians actually do have a claim to early Christianity?
Well, it was supposed to be St. Thomas that set up this church in India. And of course, Thomas, his full name, and we get this from the Dead Sea Scrolls and from the Nag Hammadi texts as well.
Right.
The full name of Thomas, this is the disciple Thomas, the doubting Thomas. His full name was Judas Thomas Didymus Lebbaeus Thaddeus, and he was the twin brother of Jesus. So Jesus had a twin brother, and it was Thomas who went to India and set up this church in India. Now, Thomas came from Edessa. And the texts in India tell us so, because when his bones were sent back 300 years later, his bones were sent back, and they were sent back to Edessa. They weren't sent to Jerusalem. So Thomas ended up being buried in Edessa. Now, all this was known about a long time ago. This is the history. Oh, I've got it here, actually. I've got it here. That's my copy, and I've got it here. The history of the Church of Malabar, which was discovered in 1501 by the Portuguese.
Wow.
And so, I mean, this history goes back a long time. And this book, obviously, the one I've got is a copy, of course. It's not the original.
Right. Well, I know the Nestorian Church had they had a huge population in India. And they were Christians.
Yeah, it was written in 1599, this book, and it's all about the history of the church in Malabar.
Wow.
Now, people knew about this. You're wondering, why did the First Crusade go to Edessa? Well, people in this era knew that Edessa was linked to the gospel story. So if we go to the history of Alfred the Great. So Alfred the Great was the first king of England, effectively. This is going back to the 10th century in England. Now, Alfred the Great was fighting the Danes and the Vikings. That was his big problem, and he nearly got defeated. But while he was having all of these battles, he sent the Bishop of Salisbury, it's a town in southern England, to go to Edessa and to India. This is in the 10th century. So he sent the Bishop of Salisbury as an ambassador to go to Edessa and to India, to Malabar, to give tribute to the Church of St. Thomas. So all of this story was known about in this early era. Otherwise, they would not be sending an ambassador all the way to India if, this was not important. So back in the day, this was obviously quite important.
Well, if you think about the logistics, it supports exactly what you're saying, because in the from the beginning of the Hospitallers and the Templars, the Knights of the Rose, the Cross, whatever. Listen, the administrative costs alone of maintaining a chain of fortresses that would go all the way to Edessa from Europe, and the whole, because it was a steady flow of traffic. There was always traffic on the trade routes going, to northern Syria. And I know that they went to Antioch, which is, according to the New Testament, that's the first time the word Christian appeared. But I don't know if that's true or not. But this is the historical record. But Edessa was a focus of the Knights. So it also brings into question the legitimacy of the Shroud of Turin, because the Shroud of Turin did have pollens that went to the Edessa area. I remember reading that specifically. I had I did a video presentation where I basically criticized the interpretation of the Shroud of Turin as being the Jesus of the gospel. However, I am on board with it being a Jesus of the Edessan area, who was maybe an ancestor of the Norman Knights, who had this fascination with that area and maintained a huge infrastructure in northern France and in the Middle East throughout the entire Crusades. So I'm on board with the Edessa. I'm on board with the Edessa deal and the historicity of a Jesus who may have been of noble blood. I'm just not on board with the fantasy version we read in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That Jesus right there, I'm not buying it.
Well, there is some history there, but we have to interpret the fantasy, and that's the problem. One thing you've just mentioned there is another interpretation, because you're mentioning Antioch. Obviously, it's this famous place that all the disciples went to and from all the time during the Council of Jerusalem. It was very important within the gospel story. But Edessa was called Antioch.
Really?
So, yeah. So that's interesting. So were they going to and from Antioch Orontes, which is the normal one, close to the Mediterranean, or were they going to Antioch Edessa? Now, I put it to everybody that they were actually going to Antioch Edessa, not the Antioch near the Mediterranean.
Okay, well, Antioch, if you break it down, Antioch means the other place. Break down the word Antioch. Anti means instead of, or the other. I'm not really sure what Ak or Ak would be.
You could, but it comes from the king. It comes from Antiochus, the Greek king who ruled that area during the Seleucid period.
Seleucid king.
Yeah, so he named lots of cities after himself. So that's where the name comes. But you do get this confusion, you see, because Josephus is always talking about Antioch as well. So is he talking about Antioch or Antioch Edessa? And then Josephus starts talking about Adiabene. Now, Adiabene doesn't exist. And he has a famous royalty from Adiabene. Now, from the very start of my research, I said that Adiabene does not exist. What they're talking about is Edessa again. But they're using a code word because Josephus was not allowed to mention Edessa.
Right.
So
he was pretty much handled by the Romans. You're right.
Totally. He was writing for Rome, and yes, you don't cross Rome. But he won't tell us this information. But again, it's Moses of Corinne that does, because Moses of Corinne says that Queen Helena of Adiabene, who's this very famous queen, we'll look at her in a minute, this very famous queen was married to King Abgarus of Edessa. So there we have this link between Adiabene, which Josephus mentions a lot, and Edessa, which is not mentioned at all in the works of Josephus. And either they are closely linked, these two cities, with this royal marriage between these two principalities, or Adiabene doesn't exist and they were talking about Edessa. I think they were just talking about Edessa, because we get this again within Acts of the Apostles, and we get another mention of Edessa within the gospel story. But again, you have to interpret it. And this comes from the from Acts 11:28. If people want to look it up, it's the famous famine. Now we know all about this famine because Josephus and lots of other people mention this. This was a famine in Judea in circa AD 48, AD 50, something of that nature. And the famine was relieved by Queen Helena of Adiabene Edessa, who bought grain and figs and sent them down to Judea. Well, then we come to Acts of the Apostles, and it says, Agabus stood up and signified there would be a great famine throughout the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. The disciples determined to send famine relief money, here's the famine relief money again, to their brethren in Judea, which they did, and they sent it by the hands of Saul and Barnabas. Now, if you just read that in Acts of the Apostles, it's just isolated on its own, just a comment that has no history to it. But if we know about this very famous famine event, which was alleviated by Queen Helena, and then we realize that Queen Helena was married to King Abgarus of Edessa, then we can interpret this story properly. It's quite obvious that the Agabus in Acts of the Apostles is King Abgarus. They're just using the Roman spelling. The Romans always put it round the other way. Instead of Abgarus, they always called him Agabus. So that's King Abgarus of Edessa. He's there in Acts of the Apostles.
So what year would this be? What this should narrow it down to a 10-year period. What decade?
Oh yeah, this is like AD 48 or AD 50. This particular
part. Excellent.
Yeah. So this is the Great Famine, which we know was alleviated by Queen Helena, who was married to King Abgarus. So we know this is talking about Edessa giving famine relief money to Judea. But the interesting thing about this is that the money was sent down to Judea by the hands of Saul and Barnabas. It means that Saul, St. Paul, who wrote most of the Gospels, was an ambassador of Edessa.
It does. Why else would they entrust him with all that?
Precisely. And that goes unmentioned. That's been unmentioned for 700 years.
So part of the cover up is the lie in the New Testament of Saul of Tarsus.
Of course. I don't think he came from Tarsus. Remember, Tarsus just means the basket. Yeah. And so are they talking about the city he came from or the basket that he was lowered down from when he was lowered down the walls of Damascus, if you remember that episode? I don't think he necessarily came from Tarsus. I think he actually was a prince of Edessa.
Okay, that's cool, but you know that it could be like an idiom. It could be a euphemistic way of saying of referring to a region, such as Ionia. There never was a real Ionia, but there were Ionian cities that were all clustered together at Turkey.
Yep.
So to say to be of Tarsus could mean to be of that area of southern Turkey that bleeds into northern Syria. I'm just
and also these monarchies used to send their sons out to various principalities to rule them as a governor. So Queen Helena was given Haran, and Jesus, we'll go into this in a minute, was obviously given Judea. And so these sons were spread out around to control the region, which was the Principality of Edessa. So he might have been given Tarsus as a place to rule, although he was very young at the time. So we'll go into this in a minute. But anyway, what we know from this is that we can find evidence for Edessa in these texts. And it was the Edessans that started this this war. So what I'm basically saying, what it boils down to, we'll go into some of the reasons why, is that the gospel story was actually about the Jewish revolt.
Okay.
So there's been a chronological dislocation.
Absolutely. That's been my conclusion as well.
Yeah. The reason for this is that Rome didn't want you to know that this gospel story and this king that we're talking about was a leader of the Jewish revolt. You're not allowed to revolt against Rome. So by all means, that had to be covered up. So what they did is they shoved his history back by 40 years. I call it the 40-year chronological chasm, when there was relative peace, in Judea. And you could have this story about this holy man in the AD 20s, AD 30. But really, he was a holy man and a prince and a king in the AD 60s, AD 70, which is when these events actually took place. And if people are not familiar with this is the Jewish revolt, started in AD 66. And
so there never was a reason there. So basically what you're saying is the Jesus of the gospel story is actually a historical person of royal blood from Edessa, and
yes.
The actual story unfolded in AD 65, 66, 67 in the time of Nero. Now,
no, Nero was obviously AD 30s. We're fairly sure of that. So the
okay.
only name that is incorrect is Nero, is the only name that ties us into the AD 20s. All the other things that Jesus
that's interesting
mentions.
because Nero was married to a Jewish woman named Poppaea, and she ended up getting accused of some type of intrigues, and she's so high up in the Roman order and that she was Jewish, he kicked her.
Yes.
Do you remember the story about her kicking her while she was pregnant?
Yes, and I have a good story about that because it might have been Saul that made her pregnant. So.
Wow. So I want to recap something. I want to recap something right now because I know you're busy and your research is prolific, and you probably have not had time to delve into my own. But I also have over a dozen books published, and my specialty is chronological systems from the ancient world, and I analyze different arithmetic that is found in all the historical texts that we can find, and I show that calendars have a common origin that are from the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC, and then there's these resets, these periods where we have these great Mediterranean dark ages, and then we come out of it, and civilization all over the world is reborn, but one of the things that I have found that is really is very compelling to me to listen to you talk about Jesus being a historical person out of Edessa. And it's compelling to me for this reason. The gospel narratives in the historical record did not even appear till 165 to 175 AD. No Christian writings, nothing was extant. So the events didn't happen when the gospel says they happened, but if they happen when you say they happened, in AD 66, 67, 68, all the way to AD 73 with the fall of Masada, or AD 70 with the fall of Jerusalem, that would make sense for the text to suddenly start appearing. And you got Ignatius, Polycarp, you have the enemies of like Plotinus. We have the very earliest church references. They're so sanitized, but they don't mention the gospel. They don't mention Jesus. They don't mention the earliest Christian documents. Don't mention the miracles. They don't mention sun darkening, like the Gospel of Marcion. This grand stage play. It's beautiful. But if we were to go back in time, like you just suggested, to AD 60s and 70s, it makes sense how all these accretions were put on the story, such as the Maccabean text have a whole controversy between a Jesus and a Judas. Then we have Apollonius of Tyana, the miracle worker, how all the miracles got put in here. Many people have mistaken him for Jesus. So we have a Jesus figure in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and it seems to me that if we push back everything 40 years, like you suggest, that answers for how in AD 175 and 180, all of a sudden the book of Mark appears. And when the book of Mark appears, we have an amalgamation. We have Jesus as a historical figure. We have Jesus as a miracle worker, borrowed from somewhere else. We have Jesus as the revolutionary and the enemy of Judas, who we borrowed from the Maccabean text. And now we have Jesus the royal, the king of Edessa, the king of Edessa. So it's very interesting. These are all things we've explored in Archaix. The only thing we've never we've never added was that Jesus actually could have been of royal blood. We've never added that in the Archaix research.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because a lot of it does fit together. For instance, the date, we're talking about the slightly later date. Well, there are many clues within the gospel story that the story was later. We have in the little apocalypse, we have Jesus describing Jerusalem surrounded by a trench and a wall. Well, that is a description of the siege of Jerusalem, comes straight out of the works of Josephus. So
yes,
Jesus
it does. You're right. Roman
Yeah.
10th Legion was German Legion. They trenched it, salted the fields, executed, sold the people off in slavery. You're right. That was 66, 67.
And Jesus describes that. So, they say it's prophecy, but, that's a description of the siege of Jerusalem. Now, Jesus also, he laments the death of Zacharias, Barchaix, Matthew 23:35. Now, that is a well-known death. This is a guy, Zacharias, who was killed between the temple and the altar. So it's a very specific death. And we know when this happened. This was Zacharias Baruch, who died between the temple and the altar. The trouble is, he didn't die until the Jewish revolt, AD 68.
So where do we get the information on Zacharias Baruch?
That comes from Jewish War. If anyone wants to look it up, it's War.
Okay, yes, Josephus also. Okay.
Yeah, 454 in Jewish War and Matthew 23:35. And of course, how can Jesus be talking about this guy's death and lamenting his death when he didn't die until AD 66? Same with Zizit ben Hakaseth. Now, this one is hidden. Nobody has ever mentioned this before. This is new. In the Gospels, it's Matthew 23:4 and 5, where he's talking about the aristocrats putting burdens upon the people and enlarging their phylacteries and their tassels and their garments and their cushions in the synagogues. Well, that comes from the Talmud. And we have this from Gittin 56 in the Talmud.
Is that the Jonathan Targum?
This is from the Babylonian Talmud.
Babylonian Talmud?
And it's a play on words with Zizit ben Hakaseth, who was an aristocrat. The trouble is, this guy was an aristocrat in AD 66 during the time of the Jewish revolt. And Jesus is making fun of him in Matthew 23, verse 4. So we have lots of pointers towards this being a later story. And then, of course, if we look to Edessa, the king in Edessa in the AD 60s was called King Isa or King Esus.
Right.
So is that where we get the name from? Well, I mean, this is where we get this very strange prophecy, if you remember, the prophecy of Emmanuel, where it says that a virgin will bring forth a son and his name will be Emmanuel. Now, that is the stupidest prophecy ever, because Jesus was never called Emmanuel.
Never.
So how can he be the Messiah because he was called Emmanuel when he was never called Emmanuel?
Right.
Well, the reason for this prophecy is it's just an indication for the enlightened, those who are in the know.
It means God with us.
Well, it does, but the king of Edessa was called Manu.
Oh, okay.
Manu El. So I think what's happened here is, the authors have gone through the Old Testament and picked out this verse from the Old Testament to use it as a prophecy because it contained the name of the Edessan king, because the Edessan king was called King Jesus Manu VI of Edessa.
Man, that's crazy, because in ancient India, the royal family was born out of the house of Manu.
Of course. There's another link with the St. Thomas Church, of course, in India.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't mean to anticipate you. I want to show you this.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books on Christian origins of Christian. This was written over 100 years ago. This is by Charles Waite.
Oh,
and,
yes.
The reason I want to show you this book is because he went through the New Testament as a geographer. He went through the New Testament, and his conclusion was everything Paul wrote, all the letters of Paul, must be at least 50 to 60 years after, because some of the cities mentioned in the book of Acts and the other ones were never even founded until Jerusalem fell.
Yes.
So he said those cities did not exist. Yeah, it's Ralph. I'm kind of blessed with an eidetic memory. Anything that's interesting to me, I remember.
That would fit my story very well. If none of that happened until 50 years later, that's exactly what I'm saying as well.
Well, that book is rare. It's very hard to find.
Yeah, I've not seen that one before.
I've had 2 or 3 copies in my possession, because my publisher actually got a box of them like 20 years ago. I still have 2. And you give me your mailing address. You give me your mailing address, no cost to you. I will mail you a copy of that book. You can have it. I don't think there's any in the UK, because there was only like 200 ever printed. It's a hardback book, but you're gonna love it. It's got information that you can definitely use.
Excellent. That sounds like a great resource, and that's the key in finding this information. Is you got to have the good resources, and we are sort of blessed that we have the internet age. I started this before the internet age, but now we can do searching for complex terms and finding. Google is a great resource, because it will, if you have a quote or something, or if you have an idea, it will go and find that in all sorts of ancient texts for you and highlight which text you want to go and find this information. It's really good.
Yes, it is. Google's okay for a search tool. It is, but I'm like you. I saw your library in your videos. I saw some of the books. I tried to get all in your business, Ralph. I tried to screenshot and then blow up your library so I could see the title.
Yes.
Yeah, but I couldn't. It still couldn't get it clear. But yeah, I have to go to the original books, man. I just have to.
Yeah. Oh, you've got to go back to the originals all the time. Yes, I don't quote modern historians and modern theologians. I go back to source, because that's the only place you can really. It's been misinterpreted too many times. Just little things like Antioch being Edessa. Now, unless you know that, your whole view of what's happening in the New Testament is distorted. You keep looking north into Antioch Orontes when you should be looking towards the northeast and looking at Antioch Edessa, and that it skews the whole of the story, because that's what Josephus was talking about when he made his books. Very interestingly, he made his Jewish War, his first of these big books, and sent it to the what did he call that? The Jews from beyond the Euphrates, who were the upper barbarians. Well, who were the Jews beyond the Euphrates? Well, that was Edessa, because Edessa was Jewish. The queen of Edessa, who we've identified already as Queen Helena, she was a Nazarene Jew, the same sect as Jesus. She was a Nazarene. She went through 7 years of initiation in order to become a Nazarene Jew. So these were the Jews from beyond the Euphrates, and they were called barbarians by Josephus. Now, if you look up barbarian nowadays, it will say someone who has a different language that you can't understand. That's why they're called barbarians.
Originally, wasn't it like Western bearded or bearded Westerners or something?
You've got it. That's the true interpretation.
Bearded
because
Westerners.
Josephus is calling these people barbarians, but the Edessans spoke Aramaic, the same language as Jesus and Josephus himself, in which case he's not talking about language at all. He's talking about beards, because the distinguishing factor here is that the Edessans were bearded, long-haired and bearded, whereas Saul, well, yes, Saul as well, but Josephus was clean-shaven because he was trying to be a Roman, so he was clean-shaven. The big difference was the beard.
Turin Shroud is a long-haired, bearded guy.
Sorry, who was?
The Turin Shroud was a long-haired, bearded guy. Now, it's my interpretation that was a knight. But
that's where the image of Jesus comes from.
Yes, well, that's where it came from. In my own video, the research I did from the pollens that were found at the time period and the 4 historical references we have of the shroud and where the knights went and the guy that died and brought it back. I did a video on this, and it really kind of upset a lot of people because they were really wanting to believe in the Shroud of Turin. But my conclusion was that is the shroud of a Norman knight. And it came into possession. It was sent back to the homeland, which was France, and that's where it surfaced in the historical record. And all the tests show that it dates to about the 9th or 10th century at the earliest. The pollens were all from the Edessa region. It's really interesting you to say this because Edessa didn't even come up on my radar until you just told me this in this video. But the pollens came from the Antioch and Edessa area, then Turkey, and then France, that are all attached to the Turin papyrus or the Turin Shroud.
Yeah, indeed. The other interesting thing about this is that, of course, the Edessans. I'm just picking up a image to share. Now that should be coming up soon. The Edessans wore a crown of thorns.
Oh, no way.
So this is the traditional crown of the Edessans, was a crown of thorns. Now, that's been interpreted as brambles, of course, if you look at any modern interpretation of the Gospels. But of course, no, this was a king. He didn't have brambles around his head. You
have numismatics.
Oh yes,
lots of delved into numismatics and confirmed this thorn of crowns.
Yeah, and so this is a crown of thorns. This is the traditional tall mitre or crown of the Edessan kings, and they kept this crown lasted for like 250 years. They had the same style of crown for 250 years, and it was a crown of thorns. Now, we don't know what the thorns are, so we got lots of guesses. So your listeners and viewers, they can have a guess as well. What are these thorns? Why do we have thorns on the crown? Now, if you look at the Parthians, go and have a look at some of the Parthian kings, the Orodes and the Phraates kings.
The Parthian kings would also be northern India.
Yeah, they invaded that part as well. Yes, but mostly it's Iraq and Iran, of course.
Yeah, it's Iraq and Iran, and when they invaded northern India, they founded an empire called the Saka Empire, and started a calendar called the Saka calendar. The reason I keep mentioning India is because this link to Manu, India is rife with the blood royal lineage of Manu. So this is crazy to me. This connection to how that the gospel story would have the crown of thorns in there, and that was actually borrowed from the real regency of Edessa, and the kings wore crowns of thorns. This is very few people come to my channel and blow my mind.
That's why they did it at the crucifixion. They dressed him wearing a crown of thorns as a mockery.
It was a mockery of the Edessian kingship.
Yeah.
I get it.
You've been defeated. Yeah.
Wow.
You're a defeated king, and we're going to dress you up as an Edessan king. And that's why they put on the purple cloak, because we'll go into this in a minute. The goal of the Edessan kings was to take over Rome. And that's why they dressed him in a purple cloak, because the purple cloak was the symbol of the emperor of Rome. And so they were dressing him up as a pretender to the throne of Rome who got defeated. And yeah, that was the Jesus character. And we've got an original statue of him. So if anyone wants to see the original Jesus, this is it. This is contemporary.
That
Let
is
me stop.
amazing. So what? So do you have anything from numismatics that tells you the provenance of that coin, like the age? What decade are we talking about?
That one is a king from the AD 210 or something of that nature. I think
Okay.
that was Abgarus the 10th, that one. So that's a later coin. But the early coins, they've all got the same crown on. It's just that the early coins are not so clear because they didn't have such good artisans making them. So that's why I choose that coin. It's also my coin as well. I've got it in my collection.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it happens to be the best Edessa coin ever minted. So yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
interesting.
That is awesome.
But this is a picture. This is a statue from the one that's going to come up in a minute. Is from Palmyra.
Okay.
And here it comes. Now, Palmyra is the city south of Edessa, and it was in their orbit. It was a part of the Principality of Edessa. It's the desert city out in the eastern desert from Syria. And Edessa controlled Palmyra. Now, this is a first century statue, sculpture from Palmyra. And so this is an image of a king. So on the left we have Aglibol, which is the moon god,
right?
As you can see, with the moon behind him. On the right is Belshazar, which is the sun god. Again, you can see the sun burst behind him. In the middle is Belshazar, which is, they say, the king of the gods, but quite obviously the guy in between is a human. The gods are sexless. You can see that they've made them completely androgynous.
Like angel, yeah. They try to
like an angel, yes. They're sexless beings. Whereas the guy in the middle is obviously a king. He's got the beard and he's got the long hair and he's got the diadema headband on the back. The diadema was a symbol of the monarchy. And he's got a diadema headband with the two tassels behind him. It was also on the coin. You probably didn't see it. I'll show it again in a minute. So this is a king. So this is an Edessan king from the first century, late first century. Well, there were only 4 kings in the late first century that this could be. And one of those kings was King Jesus Manu, the biblical Jesus. So this could well be an original statue of the biblical Jesus, complete with the long hair, complete with a beard, and complete with the Roman armor. We'll see this again soon, that they all, as a king, of course, you would wear Roman armor, which he did.
Yeah, that is interesting. That the only other feature here, somebody mentioned in the comments, this isn't me, but there is a difference. Jesus has straight hair.
Yeah, well, that's wavy hair. It's I think the Edessans,
compared to those who flanked him, the angels had very, very curly hair.
Oh yes, the angels have curly hair. Yes, that sets them apart, doesn't it? Yeah, and he's got straight hair. Yeah, just to go back to the coin just for a minute, you'll see that the coin image, which is coming up in a minute. Here we go. On the back of his head, you can see he's got the two tassels of the diadema headband.
Yes, he does. I totally missed those.
Yeah, it's the image of a king that shows us that he was a king. So we know that the center of the Palmyra triad statue was a king. And I
wonder if those two tassels are the origin of why modern day Orthodox Jews have those two locks of hair hanging down.
Well, he has those as well. You can't see it on this image, but since we're mentioning that, we have another image of this guy, because this was an interesting story. This mosaic, this is the Archaix mosaic from sort of northern Israel. It's just northeast of Galilee, and they found this this site there, which has got a synagogue, and this was in a synagogue. Because we might as well talk about the zodiacs while we're here as well. But anyway, this mosaic was discovered, and it was discovered by Professor Jody Magnus from America, obviously a Jewish theologian. And she said this was Alexander the Great. And you got to think, what planet are you on, lady?
Yeah, this is an old guy. Alexander was 33 when he invaded India.
Yeah, and not only that, you can see
the young guy is the one with the elephants.
He's presenting a sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem. Now, Alexander never did that, of course. And if we zoom in a bit on this guy so we can see him in more detail, you'll see he's got a Jewish payot, as you were saying. He's got a curly side lock of hair.
You're right.
Of course, Alexander the Great would never wear a Jewish side lock of hair.
He was Macedonian, and
he was Macedonian.
Hey Ralph, the whole story. I don't know if this is your take as well, but it's my personal opinion that the whole story of Alexander visiting the temple in Jerusalem and them showing and then the priest showing him the skeletons of ancient Anakim and Amorites, all of that is Jewish fiction. None of that ever happened. Alexander would have never went to Jerusalem. It was,
well, he would have passed through that area because he had to get to Egypt. Of course, he became pharaoh of Egypt, so he must have passed through Judea to get there.
I believe he passed through. I just don't think that he had that intercourse with the Jewish priesthood as found in the Apocrypha, like they like to brag.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, they would have to supplicate themselves to him because he was the great general with an army 50,000 strong. There was nothing they could do to stop Alexander coming through their realm.
I agree with that.
But yeah, he just passed on through and went to Egypt. But you see this guy here, he's got a diadema headband again, the famous diadema. That means he's a king, right? So that puts him apart. He's got a Jewish side lock of hair, so that sets him apart. He's got a beard. Now, Alexander never had a beard.
Right.
He's got a purple cloak on. Now, who wore the purple cloak?
Yeah. It's a good point. I can see how looking at this, that centuries later, somebody coming across this frieze would have invented the story of like Prester John.
Well, that's another parallel story to Thomas, of course. So we can go into that a little bit. But also at the bottom, you'll see he's wearing stockings. His legs are a different color to the high priest of Jerusalem.
Right.
Now that was a Parthian habit, an Edessan habit. The Edessans wore stockings. The Greeks and the Romans never wore stockings. So we can tell that this guy was at least a Parthian. He was probably an Edessan, wearing the long beard of the Edessans and the long hair, and the Jewish payot of a Nazarene. So who is this guy? He has to be a king of Edessa, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Because the Nazarene, the Edessan kings were Nazarene Jews, because Queen Helena had become a Nazarene Jew herself. So her sons would have been Nazarene Jews. And for many reasons, well, let's go back to this one. This guy's got an army as well. Oh, and you can't see it, but down below, there's another frieze down below here, where this army here in this picture is defeated in the lower register. So again, Alexander was never defeated in Judea, that's for sure. Yet they sold this story of this being Alexander to National Geographic.
Yeah, National Geographic has sold all kinds of stories.
Yeah, but this is the trouble. This is history for sale.
Yeah, National Geographic is the most politically correct. I'm telling you, I would not take history lessons from National Geographic.
No, not at all.
Ever.
But the trouble is with National Geographic is they want a splash headline, don't they?
Yes,
they don't want a headline saying Bar Kamsa found in Judea. They want Alexander the Great found in Judea, and that is what the archaeologists on site gave them.
So do
this
you
is
have
history for
a date
sale.
for this? Do you have a date for this? Do you have a date for this, Ralph?
The date of the mosaic is early 3rd century, but
Cool.
the events it is displaying is the Jewish revolt.
Okay.
Because
awesome.
this guy is the leader of the Jewish revolt, and we have this from the Talmud, which is why I was so upset with the archaeologists on this dig that they had not read the Talmud. This is Bar Kamsa from the Talmud, and Bar Kamsa was the guy who, let me look up this, he gave sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem. I've got a quote here somewhere because it's long and I can't remember it. So this comes from the Talmud. That's not the quote. That's not the quote that I want. Okay, no, I don't have the quote here. So anyway, what happened is that Bar Kamsa went to Emperor Nero, so this is real history here, and said, you should send a sacrificial calf to the priests of Jerusalem to see whether they will offer it on the altar. Oh yes, I've got it here. Here we go. Yohanan, who became the high priest after the Jewish revolt, said to the emperor, the Jews are rebelling against you. Emperor Nero said, how can I tell? That's a little bit of a joke. He's indicating that the Jews are always rebelling. So how can he tell if they're rebelling? He said to him, send them an offering and see if they offer it on the altar. So Yohanan sent Bar Kamsa, this is the fellow, Bar Kamsa, with a fine calf as an offering. While on the way, Bar Kamsa made a blemish on its upper lip. And if you look at the upper lip on this calf in the image, you'll see a little black splodge that on his lower lip. That's the blemish that was made on his lip. The rabbis were inclined to offer this calf in order to not offend the Romans, but Rabbi Zechariah Abkulus said to them, people will say that blemished animals can be offered on the altar. Basically, they refused to offer this calf on the altar. And because of that, so Yohanan says, again, he was one of the high priests, through the scrupulousness of Rabbi Zechariah, our house has been destroyed, our temple burnt, and we ourselves are exiled from our land. He's talking about the Jewish revolt here. When Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and all of the Jews were scattered around the Roman Empire. So because he's saying, because the Jewish high priests would not sacrifice this calf on the altar, they ended up in the Jewish revolt. They lost the Jewish revolt and Jerusalem was destroyed. So that's what this mosaic is talking about. That's why this mosaic is so important, because this is the most momentous event within Judaism in the last 2,000 years.
Well, I'm going to tell you now that somebody in the chat just made a comment that almost proves that you're correct and that this is a mosaic of Jesus of Edessa. Mm-hmm. He said, Jamer Funk says, any takers on the serpentine line, white robe standing on. Okay, that's a serpent that those priests are standing on, and Jesus is standing on the head of the serpent.
Yes, he is.
Do you see that? Has anybody ever pointed that out to you before?
Not so much. No.
Well, somebody in the comment section just did that. And, thank you, Jamer Funk. But that just shows that whoever designed this mosaic is signifying that this would have been the original Jesus, because that's what the prophecies of the Messiah were actually about, was that somebody was going to be born and stand on the head of the serpent, the very serpent that started the deceit in Genesis, in the Eden.
And this is going on this is going on even today. I don't know if people are familiar with the red calf, the red heifer.
Yes, it's going on today. You're right.
Yeah, if anyone wants to look it up, they are trying to sacrifice a red heifer in Jerusalem because they think it will bring about the building of the new Temple of Jerusalem. It's part of the ancient prophecy. Well, this is exactly what this guy is doing. This guy in this mosaic is presenting the red heifer. It's exactly what they're trying to do today in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And of course,
I want to add something to this because I think this is really interesting. First of all, the mosaic actually gives us even more detail about the connection between the city of Edessa and India, because we've already seen that you said the kings were named after Manu, like Emmanuel. So
yes.
the Jews had changed that to Emmanuel and said that means God with us, but actually it's that the lineage, this royal house of Edessa, was the house of Manu. And we have this huge Christian Nestorian, and I know they were Gnostics, but later we had this huge Christian body politic in India. And Edessa seems to be the link. And in the mosaic, we have these elephants, which we know come from
India.
They come from India. These would not have been African elephants. We
No,
already
they
know
got small ears.
we know what happened to African elephants because we've all read the accounts of Hannibal and what happened to his elephants when he brought them to Europe. So it's this just seeing this monkey-faced cow. Somebody in the chat, I don't see his name right here. I know his name is Madhu, but Madhu Krishna something in the chat. He's a regular, but he mentioned too that the cow is not just a cow; it's monkey-faced. So this is another Edessian connection to India.
Well, one thing about it, of course, is the archaeologist on site. She said it was a big bull, but it's a happy little calf, isn't it? It's not a big bull at
a female.
all.
Yeah.
And note that he's got ginger hair as well. Jesus was ginger, and we have this from many sources. So he was ginger-haired as well. As well, all of them.
I've read some old texts where he was redheaded. Yes.
So I'll just come out of that because since we've mentioned that, we might as well have a look at the kings of Egypt, because you've been talking about Manu and of course the connection with India, but of course the first king of Egypt was called Manu as well. The very first king in the first dynasty of Egypt was Manu. So I'm wondering also whether there was links back here to Egypt, because of course the Israelites were in Egypt more than they were in India, and I'm wondering if they took this name from Egypt and that's how it got to India.
You know, a lot of things that are done in Freemasonry and in the occult are absolutely mirrored of what their ancient counterparts are. I'll give you an example. Manu is unum in reverse in Latin. It's what you find on the dollar bill with the pyramid and the eye over it, the Egyptian pyramid with the eye over it. It says e pluribus unum. You know, the people are told it means one out of many, but in reverse it means something totally different. Just like unum may exactly be what you're talking about. This identifies a royal dynastic line that originated in ancient Egypt and is still carried in 1776 on through the founding fathers of America.
Yes, and if you take the Indian lingam, of course, the sacred stone of India, the lingam, if you reverse that one, you get Magdalene, Mary Magdalene.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Because she was identified with the tower, the Magdal. But before we get to her, perhaps we should look at the ginger monarchy, because I say all of these people were ginger. I don't know if people realize that the pharaohs of Egypt were ginger.
Yes, they're redheaded. This is Emmanuel Velikovsky. David Hatcher Childress has gone into this. Remarkably, Robert Sefer has done a lot of posts and videos on this topic as well.
Yes, I came across this about 20 years ago, and I've been writing about it ever since. So this is Ramesses the Great. the mummy of Ramesses the Great. And of course, you can see he's got ginger hair here, probably helped by a little bit of henna. But we know it was ginger hair because they took his mummy to France for preservation, because it had some bugs on it. And it went to the Paris Forensic Lab, and it was investigated by Professor Kirkcaldy. And he determined that Ramesses the Great was a true pale-skinned, wavy, ginger-haired man.
Right.
And so he had ginger hair. And I think a lot of these pharaohs did. I haven't got them here, but if you look at Yuya and Thuyu, who were the patriarch and matriarch of the Amarna dynasty of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, they're
Right.
ginger as well. They're
Right.
ginger, very ginger.
So are the kings and queens of the Amaru in South America what we know as the pre-Incan people. All those mummies are redheaded as well.
Right, yeah. There was something about the monarchies. This is Cleopatra. Cleopatra was ginger as well, you can see in this picture. This picture is very ancient as well. This picture comes from Herculaneum. So this is an AD 78.
Oh, so this is first century AD art.
This is first century, so this is a long time. This is only, when did she die? She died in about 30 BC, wasn't it? Yeah, something like that. So this is only like about 2 generations after the death of Cleopatra, and she's being portrayed as being ginger, of course. This is another one, again from Herculaneum, and again she's ginger-haired in this one as well. And of course, this spread across to the Arabias because Muhammad was ginger.
Isn't it interesting that the thousands of artifacts, hundreds of rooms, galleries, streets, hundreds of cadavers that we have found at Herculaneum and Pompeii and the surrounding villages that have been excavated in the last 300 years, and there's not one Christian artifact or frieze, artwork, and anything in those cities.
Yeah, because they'd all be in Edessa, of course.
yeah. It just goes to show you the story happened way later than you're right. It was 40 years later. It didn't happen in 80, 28, 29, 30, 33.
Yes, so, A, it was a little bit later, and B, it was in Edessa. And of course, Edessa has been trashed by Islam when Islam came through the region. And so there's nothing left of it. I've been to Edessa 3 times. And there's not one Christian left in Edessa.
There was a lot of we can thank the Crusades for that, because after a while, the Saracens, the Mamluks, the Moors, they got fed up with all the European incursions into the area, and they ended up taking Edessa over.
No, it was destroyed before that. I can show you the evidence.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have a look at that in a minute, because that's an interesting story. But I was just going to mention this guy here. This is Muhammad al-Yaqubi, and he's supposed to be a direct descendant of Muhammad.
Okay.
And of course, he's a Syrian, and everyone keeps saying to me, all the Syrians are black. No, he is a direct Syrian. His family's been in Syria for 1,000 years, and he's ginger, of course. He looks like a Scotsman. Wow. And this is why when you go around, Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, all the Muslims, they
right.
They color their hair orange because they want to look like Muhammad, because they know that Muhammad was ginger, and so this is why you get these colors. So yeah, Muhammad was a ginger as well, the same as Jesus, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of connection there as well. I don't know. There's no way of proving that because we don't know who Muhammad
there is a connection. I'm going to tell you what the connection is. Check this out. Abbot Ralph Ellis, my brother, allow me to educate you on something you probably didn't know. But the ancient city of Petra, in the pre-Quranic Arabic text, was called Becca. Becca, when the Umayyad dynasty fell, this is a Muslim dynasty, when the Umayyads gave way to the power of the Abbasids, and the Abbasid dynasty changed the Islamic capital to Baghdad, which is Babylon, they rewrote the Quran. When they rewrote the Quran, they changed the references from Becca, which is Petra, to Mecca, and they erected a black cube and covered it with a black shroud, and they changed the Muslim holy place from Jordan and the ancient city of Petra, which is also mentioned as the dwelling of the Horam and the Serum in the book of Genesis, chapter 14. It's a very ancient site, Petra, that the Romans rebuilt. But in the Quran, Mecca is the fake origin of the Muhammad story. Jordan is the real one, where Petra is, but it was changed when they moved the Muslim capital to a Mecca from Medina, the Umayyad capital, which honored all the Muslims used to bow. They used to do their prayers toward Jordan, toward Petra, and it was the Babylonian takeover of Islam, and called the Abbasid dynasty, which changed all the Qurans and all those references to Medina and Mecca, and it's been changed ever since. But that's the connection that you're missing here, because Edessa is connected to Jordan and Petra as well.
Yeah, they were connected. I have a different take on that, and it might be of interest, I don't know, to some of your listeners. I say that Mecca, the original Mecca, was Marib in Yemen, because the original, it was a pilgrimage site. Marib was a pilgrimage site at the bottom of that pilgrimage road south of Mecca. And the original temple of Marib was called Mecca, the same as Mecca today. It's not called Mecca, it's called Mecca in the Arabic. Now, the original temple in Yemen at Marib, where the big Marib Dam is, that was called Mecca, and it was a circling temple. You know how they all circle the Kaaba today in Mecca. The temple in Mecca in Marib was a circling temple. They used to circle in exactly the same fashion. So for many reasons, I said that the tradition of this circling came from Mecca in Yemen, and Mecca was the name of the Queen of Sheba. That's why it's called Saba today. Its formal name is Saba.
Yes.
The Queen of Saba, the Queen of Sheba.
Right. So the ancient Sabaeans, the pre-Arabic.
Yeah, the Sabaeans. People. And of course, it was the Sabaeans that were killed by Muhammad during the writing of the Quran. The Sabaeans were migrating north because their civilization had crashed, because their dam had failed. And they were migrating north just as the Quran was being written. And Muhammad writes about meeting the Sabaeans, coming north and befriending them, and then said that they tricked him or something, so he killed them all. These were the Sabaeans that were coming out of Marib and Mecca. And so they would have been bringing with them the traditions of Mecca, the circling temple at Mecca. So that's an interesting, that's another aside that needs looking into. I've really not done much work on that, but it needs.
Well, what we just agreed to was that what we just agreed to then, if I'm understanding correctly, is that the Mecca of today is not the origin. It's not the original.
No, not at all. Yes, they've got the wrong one. They're in the wrong place. It doesn't suit the description at all. Remember that it says it's got trees and gardens and animals and so on. There's none of that in current Mecca, which is stuck in the middle of a desert. Whereas, of course, Mecca in Yemen did have all of those because they had dammed the river with the huge great Marib Dam, and they had quite a reasonable agriculture down there. They were growing aromatics, they say, which was probably hash. It was probably hashish. But anyway, this is a quick look at this. These are the dead cities we were talking about when Edessa was initially trashed. Well, many of the towns in this region were completely trashed during the Arab invasion. This was the 7th century. This is going back a while. At the very beginnings of Islam. So Islam early mid to early 7th century. By the late 7th century, they had started expanding all out across Syria, across the Near East, across Anatolia, across all of North Africa. They had taken by the armies of Islam. And when they went through Syria, they trashed the place. And these are the towns that they trashed. And they're still there. They're all still there. You can still walk around their main streets. These are the big cathedrals they built. They're called the dead cities of Aleppo. There are 800 of these dead cities in Syria that were destroyed as the Muslims ran through this region and destroyed it all. So this is a big city. Look, the city goes right up on the hill here. It's all Christian.
So what was going on in Syria is contemporary with the Moorish and Saracen invasions of southern France.
Oh yeah,
all the way up until the days of Charles Martel.
Yeah, that was a little bit later. That was like 50, 100 years later.
Okay.
But yes, they set out in the, call it the 670s, 680s, and destroyed all of these. Are all Christian cathedrals. Remember, the whole of Syria was Christian. Right. All of North Africa was Christian. All of modern Turkey was Christian. This was all under the Byzantine Empire. And they destroyed all of these cities. Look at the size of these magnificent cathedrals that they had in Syria. And they're all still standing. They're all there, waiting for their populations to come back. But they were all killed, of course. They were all gone. So, yeah, they're the dead cities of Aleppo. And that was one of the big tragedies of the loss of Christendom in that region.
Wow.
Yeah. The interesting site, I've been around all of these sites. It's not on the tourist list. I went to Syria, of course, and it still wasn't on the tourist list. So I took a day out from the normal tour, and I did a tour of the dead cities, which was really interesting.
Yeah, that's impressive. I knew that the area was riddled with ruins from different time periods.
Yes.
I didn't know, because Islam does have this character trait of not using the building materials that were left. I mean, other civilizations, they don't have these religious stigmas. They don't have this fanatical religious stigma. If they see ruins with really high quality stone like that, they're going to repurpose it in building their own cities and all. But most of the Muslims were nomadic and they didn't need that stone, so it just stayed there all this time.
Yeah, it's absurd to me. They did this time and time again when they pushed through these regions. There was these enormous great Roman towns, and they trashed them and left them, and then built a ramshackle village elsewhere. They didn't use all of these fine buildings which were given to them, as it were, during their conquest. They built, ramshackle villages elsewhere, and so these original cities are still there. These Roman Byzantine cities are still there. Same in Spitla. If you go to Spitla in Tunisia, the old Roman city is still there, but they never used it. They built another town, down the road. It's quite strange. I was going to show you were saying that they have a habit of breaking everything. This is them. This is the kings of Hatra. So you remember we were talking about the crown of thorns?
Right.
Well, we have images of this because we've got the kings of Hatra. Now, Hatra is further down into Iraq. It was an independent principality again. And this was the kings of Hatra. I'm sorry I don't have a better image, but it's very difficult to get down there. They've been at war for so long.
It's almost the same diamond pattern.
Yeah, as you can see, it's got the same crosshatch. And remember, if we're talking about Jesus, his crown of thorns was a plaited crown of thorns.
Mm-hmm.
This crown is plaited. Look, it's plaited.
Yeah.
It's got plaits on it. And same as the kings of Hatra, you see. And the kings of Hatra were linked to the kings of Edessa. There were very close links between them. And as you can see, it has the same cross-hatching. It's the same plaited crown of thorns. But what does it look like in profile? Well, here it is.
Oh, wow.
Now that gives you a different idea of this crown, doesn't it?
Man, it almost looks like Scythian. But
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? I don't know what the symbolism is. We've been discussing this for quite some time. What's the symbolism of the thorns? What's the symbolism of the plaiting? And why this thin sort of crest shape, almost like a dinosaur crest on its head?
I'm gonna say it's interesting. I'm gonna say the connection. It's like a Scythian. Oh, it's like a Scythian step hat.
Mm,
The Cossacks. The Ukraine area where it just happens
mm.
to have a city called Odessa. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. But of course, when the Muslims came across this, what did they do to it? Oh, they smashed it up with sledgehammers.
Man,
This is what they do. They smash everything. Islam is a destructive force. And so here we have statues that are 2,000 years old, and they don't give a damn about that. They just smash it up with sledgehammers. Now, I have heard, and I don't know how true this is, that these were copies, and they had the original out the back somewhere. That's never
well,
been confirmed. I
well,
hope it.
a lot of famous pieces are replicas, but they don't tell the public they're replicas.
Yeah,
The originals
well,
are in.
I do hope it was, because otherwise it's gone forever. Just the same as this has gone forever. I'm probably one of the last people to see this. This is the Temple of Bel at Palmyra.
Okay.
That's one side of it. This was owned by the Edessans. This was the Edessan second capital city down at Palmyra, and it had
Well,
this is the largest temple in the whole of the.
I'm going to say that I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm going to disagree with you about the Edessans being Jewish, and I'm going to assert that they're actually the royal house of Israel, because I don't want to get into it. We don't have enough time here, but in my own studies, there is a huge difference between the descendants of northern Israel and the tribes that were taken into captivity, and then those of Judah who weren't even taken into captivity till 175 years later. But
Oh yeah, there were big differences between. Yeah, it wasn't homogeneous, that's for sure. There were. I call the Nazarene Egypto-Jewish because they had many aspects of Egyptian theology, such as the zodiacs, which we'll come to in a minute. But I was just
okay,
going to show you. This is the other side of the Temple of Bel. All of this is gone.
wow,
ISIS blew it up. The whole of this temple, they blew the whole thing up. So this doesn't exist anymore. I'm one of the last people to get a picture of this. And this was the most expensive temple in the Roman Empire. You'll see that the pillars were not finished off at the top. I wonder if I can zoom in on that so you can see. Yeah,
yeah,
they're not finished at the top. That's because the capitals were made of bronze. Can
yeah.
you imagine how expensive this was with bronze capitals on the top?
Well, do you think that somebody might have cut the bronze out and they
Oh
will
yeah,
hold?
absolutely. That's why when you look at these, you see it's got holes all over.
Yes.
That's people digging out the lead.
So they would have applied fire to the outside of the pillars to melt the lead out.
No, they dug holes and they actually pulled it out.
Okay, all right,
So the lead was there to hold the stones together, of course. And in later
right.
eras, lead was expensive, so they just dug holes in the wall to dig the lead out
It's the
from
same
the.
building techniques used in Cuzco and
Yes, exactly. Yeah, with
Tiwanaku.
those. What do you call those clamps? Those sort of
Yes, in between the
triangular.
megaliths, they would pour silver in between the megaliths
Yep.
because silver has a higher yield than lead, and it's
Right.
earthquake proofing their structures.
Or if you can afford it, yes. But I don't think they could here. So I think this was probably lead. But since we were talking about zodiacs, we can probably have a quick look at zodiacs. So again, I'm not sure if people are familiar with this because people cover this up by omission.
Right.
The primary symbol of Judaism, early Judaism, was the zodiac.
Absolutely.
And
Man, right. You're speaking my language right now. I am so glad you said that. I have 3 videos on the Zodiac.
Oh, excellent. Oh, I'll have to have a look at those. Yeah. Yeah. And people don't know that today, that, the zodiac was central to Christianity and central to Judaism. And this zodiac is on the Sea of Galilee at Tiberias. And this is a very famous zodiac because this zodiac was owned by Jesus.
This is King.
And we have that.
Edessa.
We have that from Josephus Flavius. He says that this zodiac was owned by Jesus of Gamala Saphias. And now that's interesting because we don't know who these characters are, but Jesus of Gamala Saphias was the rebel leader of 600 rebel fishermen. So who was the rebel leader of fishermen in the first century?
Yeah.
Called Jesus, who came from Galilee. Yeah, I think we can probably point the finger at the biblical Jesus. So this is another name for this king, because we know this character is the same as King Jesus of Edessa, because they both led the Jewish revolt. So Josephus Flavius is calling this guy Jesus this time, not Jesus, but Jesus. And he says that this guy was the leader of the Jewish revolt again. So again, we're coming back to the revolt era. And this was his synagogue. This is in a synagogue. You can't see it here, but in the register above, you've got the Temple of Jerusalem and the Ark of the Covenant and all that sort of stuff. The shofar and the incense burners, all of the accoutrements of Judaism are there. And below, we have the zodiac. And this is a processional zodiac. And you can see the head of Helios. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? This is a Jewish zodiac. In Aramaic, you can see all of the notations are in Aramaic.
Right.
And they've got Helios in the center. So they've got this is why I say that the Nazarene were Egypto-Judaic, because this is not Orthodox Judaism, of course. A, you're not allowed figures of animals. B, you're not allowed to have images of people. And certainly you're not allowed to have the Greek sun god sitting there.
That's right. That's Apollo Helios. That's no doubt.
This is Helios. He's on a horse. You can't see his chariot and horse. You can see the whip here.
Yeah.
But his chariot has been wiped out. We'll see the chariot in another picture.
Ralph, I've got videos that show the Judaism's link to Apollo Helios, the horse rider, the chariot. Yes, this is right up my community is resonating with this.
Yes. They'll be familiar with this. But I find this very interesting because this zodiac is processional. So you see that his head is pointing between Aries and Pisces. Now, your people will be familiar with procession, I presume? Procession of the equinox?
Procession of the equinox, yes.
Well, that is a date, and that date there that he's pointing to with his head is AD 10. So we can be pretty sure that this is an image of a first century zodiac.
Okay, AD 10 would symbolize something important.
Yeah, it's the conjunction between the great month of Aries here and the great month of Pisces here.
Okay. So you're talking about a zodiacal age.
The zodiac age changed in AD 10. If you look at a planisphere, that's when it changed. And that's useful because you can date things depending on their presentation. So if you've got someone with the horns of a ram, like Alexander, you can say he was born under the great month of Aries. If you have a pope with a fisher ring and a fish mouth mitre on his head, you can say that he was born in the great month of Pisces. It's a great way of dating things. And this zodiac is pointing at AD 10 here. And the other interesting thing is, what has he got in his hand here? So this is Helios, the sun.
Is that the world?
It's the world.
It is the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also told my community that the globe concept was very Greek. The Greeks had already accepted. They had already come to the conclusion that we lived on a sphere.
Yeah. And here it is. So this is Helios, the sun god, holding the earth in his gravitational grasp. So they understood the heliocentric model of the solar system. And you can see that this is a sphere that he's holding because it's got light color on one side and dark on the other. They knew the differential lighting of a sphere.
Yeah, I see. It's night and day.
Night and day. And then across the middle, we've got lines of latitude and longitude.
Yeah, I see the prime meridian.
Yes.
It's interesting though that the origin of the light on that globe right there would be somewhere around the navel of Helios.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it's coming from his navel. I do wonder what's down there actually, because unfortunately it's been obliterated. Someone built a wall across it and
See that?
messed up half of the zodiac, unfortunately. But yeah, so this is quite a complex zodiac. It's got the heliocentric model of the solar system. It's got a spherical blue and brown, blue and green Earth, which is much as it would be seen from space. It's a processional zodiac with the date of AD 10 written on it. And Josephus says that he was sent himself, so this is Josephus Flavius, he was sent by the Jerusalem authorities to destroy this zodiac.
Wow.
Because it had the heretical images of animals on it. And he was sent 4 furlongs south of the city of Tiberias to destroy these images of animals. And of course, if you go 4 furlongs south from Tiberias today, you come to this zodiac. So
yes,
I think we can be fairly sure that this is what he was sent to destroy. These were quite common, so this is not unusual. Here's another one. This is from Sepphoris.
This would not be as old as the one you just showed me.
Well, this is supposed to be 3rd century.
Yeah, the one you just showed though, if it was mentioned by
century,
had to have been 1st century.
Yeah,
this one's more detailed.
It is much more detailed. Unfortunately, it's got damaged again, but there we go. That's antiquities for you. Again, you can see Helios. You can see, but this time you can see the sun and the moon together in the center. So we've got a sun disk here, and then we've got the crescent moon there. Again, we've got Helios. I don't know if you can see that. I wonder if I can rotate that. Can I rotate it? I can't see a rotate, but oh yes, I can. There we go. There we go. So you can see the horses, the chariot down here. If I zoom in, maybe. That's Helios on his chariot being pulled across the sky by his 4 horses. And of course, we still have that same imagery today. I don't know if people know this imagery, but the 4 horses pulling the chariot across the sky of the sun god dressed in his red robe. Who is that? Well, we call him Santa. Santa is Helios. It's just that when this story went further north, they gave him a sleigh instead of a chariot. They gave him reindeer instead of horses. But he's still dressed in a red cloak, the same as Helios was. And he's still flying across the skies in his chariot as Helios did. And he's still bringing the presents to you on December the 25th. The whole point of December the 25th is it's the solstice, the time that the sun stands still and starts going back again. So this is Helios bringing the fruits of the new year to you, just as Santa Claus brings his fruits to the children of Christianity. So Santa Claus is just Helios. It's the same story.
Yep. Helios. Every time you say Helios, we think Apollo Helios because they're all the same story. But Apollo, when people make the connections in my community that Apollo is Satan, is Santa Claus, is all that. It's amazing. It is amazing when all these things get put together, because I've done a few videos on the eschatology of the Book of Revelation, and I'm showing how Apollo Helios keeps making these appearances. And although it's masked in another title, Apollyon, in the Book of Revelation, it's amazing all of this zodiacal symbolism that's found in the Book of Revelation. It starts with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, with the appearance of Chiron.
They were absorbing all these different traditions and readapting them, because a lot of them were no longer allowable. That's
right.
They were heretical. They were haram. They are trying to stuff all of these different gods into a monotheistic religion. It was very difficult to do. And so a lot of this had to be covered up. Things like the zodiac were covered up. But in early Christianity, of course, they knew the zodiac. This is the
Oh wow.
Betsyan mosaic. Now, this is later. This is 6th century.
Yeah.
This is Christian. This is not Judaic anymore. And you can see they've changed the zodiac into a calendar. So now the zodiac constellations have become months of the year. So you can see in the Greek here, we've got Aprilos, Mayos, Junios, and then around the other side, Octobros, Novembros, Decembros. So, I mean, this is 6th century. You know, things haven't changed that much. We still use the same names. And in the center, the same as this one, you saw in the center the sun here and the moon here. Well, again, we have it here. We have a character being the sun and another character being the moon. Now, who was the man and woman surrounded by 12 disciples? This is in a Christian cathedral.
Would this be Jesus and Mary? Jesus and Magdalene?
Yeah, this is Jesus and Mary, the man and wife. Jesus is the sun god, of course, because he was the man. And Mary Magdalene is the moon god because she's an image of Venus. She's Aphrodite.
Right.
She is Isis.
Mary, Maori, Maury, Mari. She has so many different names and different ways to spell it, but it all goes back to the old goddess cults. You're right.
Yeah. And well, Mari, we're not quite sure on Mari. Mari in Syriac, in Edessa, Mara meant bishop, and Mary would have been the female bishop, which she probably was. So, so this is probably again an image of Jesus and Mary, surrounded by the 12 disciples. And of course, that tradition flowed down into later years, and we got the and of course, that is a zodiac. Of course, you know, the 12 constellations became 12 disciples.
Is this the first depiction of a zodiac using apostles instead of zodiacal signs?
It probably is, yes. It probably is. But then that tradition flowed down, of course, and they replaced the apostles with 12 knights.
Yes, the knights. So the knights of the round table.
They're just disciples. They're exactly the same. It says so in Arthurian legend, because I wrote this book on Arthurian legend as well. That there were 3 tables were made. The first table was the table of the Last Supper. And it was a round table. It was not rectangular like you see in the Da Vinci model of it. It was a round table of Jesus and his 12 disciples. And then we had the round table of Joseph of Arimathea. And then we had the round table of King Arthur and his 12 knights. So Arthur and his 12 knights is exactly the same as Jesus and his 12 disciples. And we can see from these zodiacs that, of course, Jesus or Arthur would have been sitting in the center of the table. That's where the kingly character, the sun and the moon characters, they sat in the center. So there wouldn't be, you see on this one, this is a very old table. This table is 800 years old. This is the table of Winchester, which was made by Edward I. So we're going back 800 years with this table. It's huge as well. It's big. It's I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 meters across or something.
So the rose in the center forms a pentagram.
Yeah, that's the rose of Henry VIII. They've replaced the original artwork with Henry VIII here. Originally, that would have been someone else. And the king should be sitting in the center. He should not be a separate bit on the top. They obviously, by the time we got to Henry VIII, they didn't understand the zodiac and the symbolism of the zodiac.
So do you know, Ralph, do you know when, like I have a book right here in my library about, it was a short period of time in the transition between the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages when there was a cult that emerged that referred to Jesus, Lord of the Mushroom. And
Yes.
Jesus is literally surrounded by mushrooms and all this artwork for about a 50-year period.
Yes, I've seen that. There was a theologian wrote a book on that.
That's probably the book I have.
Yeah, Jesus and the Mushroom. Was that Allegro? I think that wrote that book.
Yes, I think so.
Yes, that was interesting. But I wrote about this Arthurian. We won't go through this because it's too much to talk about. But in my Grail cipher, I list all of the connections between the gospel story and Arthurian legend, and there are many to be found. So that's an interesting aspect as well. But yes, when we go back to these zodiacs, what else do we have with the zodiacs? Well, the zodiacs, of course, we get a similarity with Arthur here as well. Just very briefly, this is a zodiac, a standard zodiac. You can either have the sun in the center, like this one does, or you can have the northern stars in the center, like this one does, pointing at the pole star. And of course, the sun was an image of Jesus, as the Son of God, and that works in the Greek as well as it does in the English. But this one has Ursa Major in the center, and Ursa Major
that's the pole star. That's the pole star.
It's the pole star, but it's in the Greek. It's Arcturus, which is where we get the Arctic comes from. Yes. And it means the Great Bear. And of course, this is the Great Bear here. And of course,
we just call it the Little Dipper.
Yeah, the Little Dipper or the Great Bear. And no, this is the Big Dipper, not the Little Dipper. That's on the back here. This one is the Little Dipper here. This is the Big Dipper. And it's the Great Bear. But of course, King Arthur was the Great Bear, Arcturus. And so the central character to a zodiac can either be King Arthur, or it can be the sun symbol, the Jesus symbol, or in this case, if we go back to this one, the Helios symbol.
Yes.
Again, the sort of Jesus character surrounded by his 12 disciple knights of the zodiac constellations. So yeah, this is where this religion all comes from. It was all stellar originally. So it was all cosmic. Everything within these ancient religions was cosmic.
In the Archaix research, we have shown extensively in published books and in that the oldest calendrical systems in the world, they only factored the movement of the stars in the stellosphere. Later ones incorporated the moon, and then later after that, the sun was actually used as a calendrical reference. But it's really interesting that the sun came last in almost all calendrical systems all over the world. It's the most recent development in the institution of calendars. Older than
Judaism,
the sun.
Yeah, Judaism uses the moon mostly. In ancient Egypt, they tended to use the sun. But yes, in Judaism, they tended to use the moon. But of course, even within ancient Judaism, one of the famous characters is the Queen of Sheba. And Sheba in Egyptian means star. So she was the Queen of the Stars.
Oh, wow. That was the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 134, 135. That meant son of a star.
Yeah, he was the son of the star as well. They're all calling themselves the same name, but people get
still
confused.
do it today in Hollywood. They all got stars on the boulevard.
Yeah, they're all stars, yes. People get confused by the languages. I've had criticism from some critics saying, oh, these people cannot have all of these different names. But of course, they were speaking many different languages.
Absolutely.
And so when you get things like Sheba, which means star, well, you go to the Bar Kokhba uprising, they were using Kokhba, which also means star. Things like Judas, Thomas, Didymus. Thomas and Didymus are the same name in two different languages, meaning the twin. And then he was also called Lebbaeus Thaddeus. Well, that's not two names, that's only one name in two different languages, meaning big-hearted. So yes, you get these multiple sounding names all the time when really it wasn't that complicated at all. They're just speaking, you can imagine they're speaking Greek, they've got maybe a smattering of Latin, they've got Aramaic, they may even have a bit of Parthian, I suppose, because these people came out of Parthia as well. Oh, I've not been into that, have I?
Well, the Parthian Empire would have been, what's that, ancient Persia and northern India?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they originally it was Persia, then it became the Seleucid Empire of the Greeks, so then it was Greek speaking. So the whole of Iran and Iraq was Greek, between the third century and the first century.
Preach it, brother. Man, I'm telling my community all the time. They people just don't understand. The entire ancient world was getting everything from the Greeks. The Greeks were exporting the Zodiac. They were exporting all this history and mythology, and everybody else, after this huge systemic reset coming out of the Dark Age period, they just started borrowing all the Greek stuff, but flavoring it in their own cultural idioms and epithets and all that. But yeah, the Greeks, that's why the book of Revelation, written in Greek, needs to be interpreted from a Greek perspective and not a Judaic. It's amazing what you'll find.
Yeah, all of that region, Iraq and Iran, were all speaking Greek. Even northern India was Greek, of course. But then they were pushed back by the Parthians. But the Parthian language was not very complex, so it wasn't very good, especially for literature. So it wasn't used very much. So they were still Greek speaking all the way through until it started being replaced by Aramaic. And then Aramaic became the lingua franca of that region. They were all speaking Aramaic. Now, Aramaic it's a dialect of Hebrew, basically. It was the common language of Hebrew, whereas Hebrew is the biblical language.
The biblical Hebrew is like really just the rabbinical literati. It wasn't really known to the people.
Yeah. But Aramaic is very similar, but it was the language of the people rather than the language of the rabbis. But I have another take on Aramaic as well, which is gaining ground, I think, because all of my study started really, I suppose, in the Old Testament. And I said that, of course, these people in Egypt, the Israelites in Egypt, would have spoken Egyptian.
Yes, they would have.
You can't live in Egypt for 400 years or however long they were there, that's disputed, and not start speaking Egyptian, the same as any immigrant into America will speak English.
I agree.
And so the original Israelite language, and I say they were very closely linked to Egypt, would have been Egyptian, substantially Egyptian. And then when that language moved out with the Israelites into Judea and all of the other places they went to, they took that language with them. So Aramaic is a dialect, a daughter language of Egyptian.
I'm going to agree, and I'm going to further say that many of the words in Aramaic are almost the exact reverse, because when they had left Egypt, they had borrowed the writing habits of the locals, which was writing from left to right. The Egyptians were writing their hieroglyphics from right to left. So in the old world, we find this inverse. All these texts, when they're translated, it seems like, I'll give you some examples. Like in Egypt, you have the goddess Neith, but in Greek, it is Athene, and the name of the city, Athens, what Athens is named after.
Yes.
So we have Noph in Egyptian, but that's the god of dark destruction, of resets, called Phen or Phoenix in Greek. So over and over, we have this reverse. I've got a whole list of them. And what's interesting to me is there's a researcher in the 1890s who I just posted on Twitter, on my Twitter feed just a couple days ago. But I showed the chart where he shows that going from Minoan linear A to Minoan linear B, then the Phoenician alphabet is, many of the letters are the exact reverse of what you find in the Indo-Iranian pictograms or pictographs from the inception of their language. So it's the same thing. People are taking their languages with them, but when they learn to write them, they're learning to write them in the local, however it's written, or Bustafon. You know what Bustafon is? Writing right, left. So yeah, this This solves
As
many
goes the ox.
text. What is it called?
As goes the ox.
As
Booster
goes
fun.
the ox. Booster fun. Yeah. Crazy.
Because when you're plowing a field, you go left to right and then you go right to left. When
I have a feeling that if you and I were in a coffee shop, we would probably pass about 8-9 hours real fast without even realizing the time passed.
Yes. Yeah. It's surprising how many connections there are between all of these different civilizations and different peoples. One of the reasons for that we haven't been into is I think that a lot of these Israelites, Egypto-Israelites, from when they were kicked out of Egypt, spread themselves out across the Mediterranean. And of course, they took their language and their writing systems and so on with them. And that's why I think we have so many connections with the Minoans and the people of that region. But we can go into that if we've got time. Going back into Egypt again, we've got these traditions that come out of Egypt, and I don't think people understand that we still have them. One of the ones I like to talk about is just a very simple one, which is, if I can pick it up, this one. If I do a presentation, share a screen. That should be coming up in a minute. It came up fairly quickly on that one. There
you go. Yeah, man.
Yeah, just these little things that pass you by unless you understand them. To most people, this is just a fairy story. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But what is Snow White? Snow White, I think, excuse me, is the Snow White moon, who is followed by the 7 planets across the ecliptic. So the 7 dwarfs are the 7 planets following Snow White moon across the ecliptic. It's a story of the cosmos. And the wicked witch is who was outshone by the Snow White moon was the Milky Way. And in the which way around shall I do this? This is the Milky Way. Here it is.
Right.
In the night sky. We don't see it today because unfortunately we've got too many lights around, so we don't get to see it. But if you're out in the desert in Australia, that's exactly what it looks like, So it's quite prominent in the sky. Right. And what is that in Egyptian theology? And again, I don't think this has ever been mentioned before I wrote about it. But anyway, it's Nut. So Nut is the Milky Way. That's why she arches her body across the heavens. That's why she has arms and legs on either side, because if you look at the Milky Way, it splits into arms and legs either side. So the Milky Way is Nut. And the Geb is the earth underneath.
That's Geb on the bottom, right. And so we have this the pharaohs, because remember, right next to the Great Pyramid, they excavated a very ancient ship that looks a lot like this.
Yes, they did. Yeah, the Giza bark. Yeah,
right next to the Great Pyramid was a hidden vault that had the ship.
Yeah, that's the bark. This is the Ark of Ra. So Ra had an ark as well.
I got it.
And he sailed across the cosmic seas. So instead of like Helios was driving his chariot across the skies, or Santa Claus is driving his sleigh across the skies, in Egypt they had a boat. And they sailed across the cosmic seas. So the heavens above were a big ocean. They always regarded it as being an ocean, the seas in the heavens above. And they sailed a boat across these cosmic seas. And that's why when we get Aphrodite, Aphrodite is, of course, Venus, who is Isis, of course, the Egyptian Isis. But Aphrodite has a very strange name, which people don't seem to be able to translate. And I've not seen this translation anywhere else before. But Aphrodite means she was born in the foam of the sea. And so, excuse me. And so they're thinking of Aphrodite as being linked with seashores, which is why you see that very famous painting of Aphrodite in a seashell on the seashore, because she was born in the foam of the sea. But of course, the sea is the cosmos above. It's not our earthly sea. And so what is the foam in the sea above? Well, it's the Milky Way, of course. So Aphrodite, Venus, was born in the Milky Way above. So that's what it's talking about. But if we go back to the story of Snow White, the wicked witch gives her a corset and puts it on her and pulls it tighter and tighter, so she gets thinner and thinner and thinner, which is, of course, exactly what the moon does as the moon approaches the sun.
Yes, I see the connection now.
It becomes a crescent moon. And then, of course, the moon meets the sun prince. So the moon dies because the corset gets tighter and tighter until she dies, and the moon dies as well. The moon becomes the new moon. It's a dead moon. You can't see it. But then the dead moon kisses the sun. And here is an image of the moon kissing the sun, just as Snow White is kissed by the sun prince.
I have a book. I have a book with the title Aphrodite in Reverse. Are you familiar with that book?
No, I've not heard of that one.
Here it is.
You've got a good library there.
Oh, this is Aphrodite in Reverse.
And you know where all of your books are as well.
Well, I really don't. I've turned the camera on other videos to show. You're not going to believe all the Encyclopedia of Britannicas I have from the 1800s, Jewish encyclopedias. I got so much. I got a whole wall behind this camera.
I like a good library.
I could do the rest of my life. I could spend the rest of my life in the library. Yeah, this is a Llewellyn publication. This comes from your neck of the woods.
Ah, right, yeah, over in Wales.
Yes. I don't really know what it's about yet. I haven't read this one. It's on my to-do list, but it's about the mysteries of. I guess it's just it's Aphrodite spelled backwards, but I'm not really sure what the book's about yet. You just triggered me when you were talking about Aphrodite. I don't know. Maybe it may not be worth my time. I'll check it out.
Oh, there's a golden gem in every book. That's always the nice thing about it. You might find a book that's 90% rubbish, and then you'll find a little gem somewhere in the middle of it.
Absolutely. There's going to be value everywhere.
Oh yes, in every book. And yeah, just to finish this tale, of course, they get married. So this is the diamond ring of the eclipse. And remember, the eclipse only happens when the moon is dead, just as Snow White was dead. That's the only way you can get a solar eclipse like that. And of course,
that's profound.
Yeah, just as she died and she was kissed and she comes back to life, so the moon comes back to life after it is kissed by the sun prince. And so the moon comes back to life and gets bigger and fatter as if she is pregnant again. And that is the story of Snow White. It's a story of the cosmos. The cosmos gets into everything, but we've forgotten our astronomical tales, our mythology from the past. So, we were talking about Last Supper tables. I've got some Last Supper tables here. Oh, here's a nice Last Supper table.
My favorite one is of all the bulldogs at a table.
Yes, I've seen that one. That's fun. Yes. Yeah, but there is a mystery here too, because there's mysteries within mysteries in these ancient stories. So we have the Last Supper, and you've probably heard the controversy with the Leonardo depiction, where the disciple looks rather female.
Right.
Well, this is Drogheda Cathedral. This is in Ireland, just north of Dublin. This is in a Catholic cathedral. And who's that next to Jesus? Male or female? What do you reckon? I think that looks female.
Looks female to me too.
Looks like a young Diana to me.
Wow, that is Diana's profile.
It is, isn't it? Diana and Jesus. This is in, but this is 19th century carving. So
Right.
yeah, it was predicting what she looks like. But of course, they were drawing from the same families. Maybe the same families always look the same. So yeah, there are lots of people who knew that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus, and there they are together at the Last Supper table. But it's not just here. I mean, we've got it in Italy, of course, and we've got it here as well.
Right. Right.
Now this is Turku. This is the capital of Finland. So we're going up into the far north, the old capital of Finland, and this is the main cathedral. And who is sitting on the right side of Jesus in this one?
That's definitely a female.
Male or female? Yeah.
That's definitely a female.
So they knew it. And not only that, she has the colors of Mary Magdalene. Remember,
Yes.
they have a uniform, these ladies. If she's blue and white, it's Mary the Mother. If she's green and gold or green and orange, then it's Mary Magdalene. And so this lady is dressed in the colors of Mary Magdalene. So here is Jesus and Mary Magdalene at the Last Supper table again. Again, lots of people knew this heresy.
Wow.
And here is another one. This is the Last Supper by Napoleon Bonaparte. Well, he didn't do it himself, of course, but he commissioned it.
Right.
And this is a mosaic, so this is quite an undertaking. This is quite a fantastic one, and it's a copy of Leonardo, an exact copy of Leonardo, even with the guy with the dagger here. You know, as you see in, not sure what he's doing, the disembodied hand, all of this. It's exact copy of Leonardo's. But who is on the right side of Jesus?
Again, it's a female. You're right. This is a king and queen. You're right.
Yeah. And she's in the colors of Mary Magdalene. She's in the green.
In all these Last Supper images, we have really been, so the Christian world has been trained to see a Jesus and Mary Magdalene. But what's really being conveyed here is a king and a queen, a royal dynasty.
Yeah. So this is King Jesus Manu, and this is his wife, who was Mary Magdalene. So we've not been through this, or there are so many secrets in this game. There really are. I'll just stop. We have the story of, so within the works of Josephus, this guy is either called King Jesus Manu, the king of Edessa, or he's called King, well, no, sorry, not king. He's called Jesus of Gamala.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that Gamala title is an Edessan title. In Edessa, it was called Kama. Now, down in Judea, they're calling him Gamma, Jesus of Gamala. But we know this is the same person because Josephus says that he was the leader of the Jewish revolt, and he was the leader of 600 rebel fishermen, who was the leader of rebel fishermen, and he was blamed for the destruction of Jerusalem during the Jewish revolt. So we know that these guys are linked, that they were the same person. King Jesus was King Jesus. But the interesting thing is, we know quite a lot about Jesus of Gamala because he's a famous person in the Talmud. Now, Jesus of Gamala became high priest of Jerusalem in AD 62, and he led the Jewish revolt. But the interesting thing from the Talmud is that Jesus of Gamala married Mary and Martha Bothus, who lived at the house of Simon. And if you've read the works of Professor Robert Eisenman, in about 200 pages of his book, I think it was his James, the Brother of Jesus book, he demonstrated that Mary and Martha Bothus were Mary and Martha of Bethany, the Bethany sisters.
Okay.
Because they both lived at the house of Simon. They were the daughters of Simon Bothus. And that's why Mary and Martha lived at the house of Simon.
Simon Peter came from.
Yeah, it's where Jesus went to, and he met Mary and Martha, and he met Mary, but Martha was sitting in the room. I forget the story entirely, but anyway, and it was Mary of Bethany that anointed Jesus as the King of Judea. Remember this anointing. We have this anointing in the house of Simon at Bethany, and it's just sort of skipped over. It was just this random woman that came and just anointed him for no real good reason.
Right.
Why do we have it there? Well, because the anointing is how you make a king of Judea.
Right.
Is how you become the Messiah, how you become the Christ. The Christ means the anointed one. The Messiah means the anointed one. You have to be anointed in order to become the next king. Just as King Charles was anointed just recently, just last year, he was anointed by the high priest, by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I don't know if you've seen this, but if you go back and look at the videos, or you can see still images online, they lowered a shroud around him, a sort of canopy around him, so you couldn't see the anointing. But Charles, Prince Charles, was in a smock, so he wasn't dressed up. He was just in a smock. They put this shroud around him, and then he was anointed on his chest and on his forehead and somewhere else with sacred oil that they had got from Jerusalem. This oil for this ceremony just last year, the oil came from Jerusalem because he was being anointed as the new Christ, as the Messiah.
I wonder if they have made that oil from the fat of a previous red heifer.
Yes, one doesn't know. They said it was it was olive oil and various other aromatics, but we don't know precisely.
Interesting.
So this anointing by Mary Magdalene at the house of Simon was pivotal. It was how Jesus became the Christ. We know him as the Christ, but that only happened because he was anointed by oil with Mary Magdalene, and that made him the king. And what had obviously happened is the king of Edessa had died. This would have been AD 50s when the king of Edessa died. Now, Jesus wasn't in Edessa. He was down in Jerusalem. This is what they did with their sons. The princes they put out to other places for their education. Jesus went to Egypt for his education. Remember, out of Egypt I have called my son. So they had to have a quick ceremony down in Judea. He wasn't in the palace up in Edessa. So they had this quick ceremony at the house of Simon in order to make him the new king of Edessa and Judea, because remember, his mother was the queen of Judea. We've not been through that. Where do we have that? Do we have that here somewhere? Somewhere we have some images. Yes, here. Let's have a look at this. So if I do a quick screen share. Coming up now. So his mother, who was Queen Helena, Helena meaning the Greek lady, which she was, she became the queen of Judea. This was in the AD 50s. Remember, we were saying that she became a Nazarene Jew. The reason she wanted to become a Nazarene Jew is because she wanted to take over Judea, to expand their principality down through Syria, down through Judea. How do you do that? Well, you become a Nazarene Jew. You save Judea from famine with the famine relief money, and then you go and build the biggest palace in the whole of Jerusalem. So this is the palace of Queen Helena of Edessa in Jerusalem. This is just south of the Temple Mount. They're excavating this at present. This is called the Giovanni parking lot excavation, because they still won't say that Queen Helena was the Queen of Judea. But anyway, she was. They refused to admit it. And this is her tomb. This is the tomb of Queen Helena of Edessa, the largest tomb in the whole of Jerusalem, just north of the North.
The largest tomb in all Jerusalem belongs to a female regent.
Yeah, that's right.
You know that pisses them off.
which is why she's not advertised very much. I mean, nobody advertises her very much. And this is her sarcophagus, which was in this tomb. It was found in this tomb. And this is her sarcophagus. And it has the Queen written on it, scratched on the back of it. And this is the sarcophagus that I found. That there was a bit of a backstory to this one, because this was supposed to be in the Louvre. So, how long ago was this? This was back in the 2000s. I went to the Louvre in Paris to go and see this, and it wasn't there.
Oh, wow.
So I was a bit frustrated by this because I'd flown all the way to Paris. And so I went to the curator and said, look, where's the sarcophagus of Queen Helena? And he said, there's no such thing. We don't have it. And I said, well, I know you've got it. You must have it. No, we don't have it. So I had to go home and I did some searching. This is in pre-internet days in a way. There was very little in the way of internet in those days. And so I finally found a clipping from the Times of London from the 19th century saying that Professor Dilsusi, I think his name was, who was the archaeologist, and they had a picture of him giving this sarcophagus to the Louvre. Mm-hmm. So I wrote to the Louvre and said, look, you have got it. I can see a picture of it. So can I come to see it? And then eventually they got back to me and said, yeah, okay, we found it. And they obviously found this sarcophagus in a huge, great warehouse somewhere full of boxes,
just like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, looking for this box in this huge, great warehouse somewhere. And they found it. And I said, oh, well, thanks. I'll come over and see it. So I went over to Paris and it wasn't there. So I went down to the curator and said, look, I've come over to see this sarcophagus. Where is it? And they said, oh, we've sent it to Israel. They were having an opening of a museum in Israel. So they'd sent it to Israel. So I had to wait another 6 months for it to come back into the Louvre. Wow. So I had to visit again. And finally, here we have the sarcophagus of Queen Helena. Now, she was the de facto queen of Judea in the AD 50s, AD 60s. She was the queen of Judea. And so, of course, any son born to her, like King Jesus Manu, would have been the king of Judea and therefore the king of the Jews, which is the other title for the biblical Jesus.
And Jerusalem was not going to have any Edessan rule over them.
No. Well, they were happy at the time.
That controversy is preserved in the gospel. I mean,
oh yes,
when Jesus entered the region, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they did not argue his doctrine. They argued his pedigree. They asked him, look, when has a prophet ever come from Galilee? When has a man of God ever come from Nazareth? So they were arguing his origin and pedigree, and they weren't arguing his doctrine.
Arguing if he was a king. Are you a king of the Jews? Asks Pontius Pilate.
Absolutely.
So so yes, he was the. That's why, one of the many, many reasons we can be sure that this king of Edessa was the biblical Jesus, because he was also the king of the Jews. But another interesting thing, one of the reasons they are keeping this quiet is that this same guy, Jesus of Gamala, in the Talmud says that he married Mary Boethus, who is Mary Magdalene. That was identified by Professor Robert Eisenman. Now, the reason for keeping this quiet is A, he's not supposed to marry a woman, he's supposed to be celibate and all the rest of it. B, they didn't like Mary Magdalene because Mary Magdalene was the richest woman in the Roman East. So she was the daughter of Simon Boethus at the house of Simon. Now, Simon Boethus was one of the richest men in the whole of the Roman East. When she married Jesus of Gamala, she was given a dowry of 1 million gold denarii. In today's money, that's about $26 billion.
Wow.
They were stinking rich. And again, that puts a very different slant on the gospel story. No longer do we have this, lone poverty-stricken artisan. What we have is a royal dynasty who were tremendously rich and powerful. That is why people were making stories about them. That's why people recorded their history. But of course, they lost that money. So I suppose you could say they were poor. So they went for this Jewish revolt. They put all of their money. I'm not a very good gambler. What is it in one of these things where you put money on red and you choose between money?
Oh, roulette. Yeah.
Yeah, you choose between red and black. Well, they stuck all their money on red and it came up black, didn't it? They lost this revolt against Rome, and so they lost all of this wealth. And then we have this story from Yohanan ben Zakkai, who became the high priest after the Jewish revolt, and he's wandering around Jerusalem, and he meets this lady, Mary Bothus, and he says he doesn't recognize, or he pretends he doesn't recognize her. Who are you? Because she's picking grains of barley from between the dung of donkeys. She's so poor now, she has to forage for food on the pavement. Who are you? And she says, I am Mary Bothus. And he says, what has become of your great wealth of your family? And of course, she's lost everything. And that's when she is sent into exile in Provence in France and goes to France.
So wait a minute. Are we talking about? Are you insinuating that the Moravian kings may be of Edessian descent?
Well, that's a possibility, isn't it? Yes, she goes off to Provence, and I wonder if I've got some images of Provence here somewhere.
Well, I'm going to tell you now, this has been most impressive with me. I'm going to have to cut the video a little short, and I'm going to have to invite you back to go on to other topics. But
yes,
what's most impressive to me is that I'm not easily swayed if you show me material that is 800, 700, 600, 500, 400, 300 years ex post facto. But when you can show me first century material that actually makes us understand the origin and the provenance of these New Testament stories and records, that is very impressive. I'm familiar with Josephus. Didn't really know about the Edessa stuff, but it makes more sense to me now that I have studied the scholars who have put together the Gospel of Marcion about this guy who had these amazing teachings, but there's no miracles, there's no crucifixion, there's no sun darkening and any of that. It's just it's a miracle worker who came from the region of Galilee or maybe Edessa, and no one really knows. He's a foreigner, but he comes in, he has these beautiful teachings in parables. And then these accretions that come from Apollonius of Tyana, the miracle worker, all of a sudden they appear tied to the story when they had nothing to do with each other. 200 years later, they're now the same story. And then the names of them are borrowed from the Maccabean literature. Jesus and Judas were adversaries in the Maccabean revolt in the Apocrypha. So we have three different layers of a story. You've just provided a fourth that gives it historical context. And this is very impressive. It's very impressive to me. I'm going to look into it more, and I want to invite you back on the channel later to talk about some more stuff.
Yeah, because we've not touched the Old Testament.
We can spend weeks on the Old Testament, my brother.
We could, yes. We've not touched the nativity, where Jesus came from, how he came out of Egypt, why he was Egyptian, because in the Gospels and in the works of Josephus, he's known as the Egyptian false prophet. Now, there's another story. Why was he Egyptian?
The very fact that you got over 1,700 people listening in the chat at one time during this video means that my community is thirsty for more. So I'm going to be inviting you back, and you can just choose the topic where you want to start with, because it doesn't matter what time period you start with. I'm going to have some things to offer and questions to ask. It's
oh yes, yeah. I think
this has been a very impressive video.
On the next one, we could probably go back to the Exodus and start there and start from the beginning, because that's an interesting
story. Absolutely. I like that topic as well. I noticed that in your book. Well, the only book I read of yours is the Exodus account. You provided
Yes.
all the stuff about Santorini, all the material from the Egyptian your take on the Egyptian tempest steel and all that.
Yes.
We need to get into all that. My community needs to hear that stuff. Exodus is
Excellent.
awesome because it was a lot more than just Israelites leaving Egypt when that happened. I mean, even the pre-Greek cultures were all founded at the same time. Egypt just emptied into the Mediterranean. But
yes, it did.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And I'm talking fast because I've been drinking all morning, coffee and water, and it's time for me to get to that bathroom.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the talk. It's been really great to talk to someone who knows their subject as well. So you can,
I'm
you can
impressed.
balance me out.
I'm impressed, man. You've definitely backed up the fact that you've been doing this for 45 years. There's no doubt. So I need to stop this video. We're going to say goodbye to Mr. Ralph Ellis, author of about 12 to 15 books, and we're going to invite him back on the channel. And in the description box, please visit his channel. Check it out. There's 32 videos there. Start with the intro video and work your way through them. They're data packed. You guys like my data dumps when I'm doing it. That's what he does on every single video. So you're going to check it out. I'll holler at you later, Ralph. Till next time.
Thanks for having me. We'll see you all again later. Cheers.
That was a great guest. I'm going to hit this outro. I'd like to hang out and do some post-video chat with you guys, but it's not happening today because I'm a man on a mission. So I'm going to go ahead and exit with a short outro. Love you guys.